everybody. Welcome back to the Woodruff cast. I'd like to give a shout out to all my paid subscribers. You make this all possible, and you are very much appreciated. Great show for you today. I've got Mr. Nick Dagan Best is returning to the Woodruff cast. Before I bring him on, I've got a couple announcements. My book on Jeffrey Dahmer is right on the lip of coming out next month. If you want updates as to how to order, please check below and sign up for the newsletter that is associated with the site that I put together on Substack for the Dahmer book that chronicled my writing of the book and the astrology behind it that inspired it. And I promise you, it is unlike any romance novel you will have ever encountered. Also, I'd like to invite everybody to join my friend, the novelist John Calindo, with our podcast, Fame Whores. You can sign up for that below. That is, of course, free. And we are, I guess, broadcasting a couple of times a month, covering topics that relate to pop culture, cinema, music, television, some politics, though we try to keep out of that, and also the crazy condition that is known as porn creep, which is the effect of widespread pornography amidst our cultural moment that we're living through now. I have a feeling people are having more sex with themselves than with other individuals. Thank you, Pornhub. Anyway, so my guest today, again, Nick Dagan Best. Nick is an astrologer, professional astrologer, and author from down in South Africa. He has written the book Uranus USA. It's a great graphic novel that looks at the history of the United States through the transits of Uranus. And he has a lot to say in our discussion today about that particular movement of Uranus now going into Gemini and what the United States possibly can expect from that. It's your lucky day because Nick, for private consultations, is offering a 25% rebate. And you can follow the link I have down below to his site. Put in the code Uranus when you're making your booking for your session with Nick, and you will receive 25% off. So let's get on with the show. Please welcome my guest, one of my favorite astrologers working today, Mr. Nick Dagan Best. So Nick, thanks a lot for joining me again on the cast. It's always great having you here. I think you've done 2 or 3 or 4 with me over the years.
Yeah.
So you've become quite the regular. How are you doing and stuff?
Yeah, not too bad. Better than a lot of people, it seems. This has been 2025 has been a strange year to be an astrologer. I gotta say that. And this coming from someone who has been expecting 2025 to be a focal point and something of a shit show. And yet even I'm taken aback at how crazy things have gotten.
Do you at all feel do you at all feel responsible for Trump's return?
No, of course
I
not.
say that, in jest, of
Yeah.
course,
Of
but
course. Yeah, yeah. No,
as
I know you're kidding. I would have to be like really self-centered to think that like my little astrology prediction somehow influenced so many people to vote for the guy. I'm quite sure it's not the case.
so am
Um,
I.
yeah.
But but
I
but
would hope so.
but that association is there because I'm sure you followed what was happening prior to the election. And
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
so many astrologers, were letting their personal bias slip in. I think, would you say most astrologers are, left leaning, liberal leaning, socialist leaning?
Um, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
It seems like most are, but there certainly are, conservative astrologers out there.
Yeah.
What I would say is the community is certainly largely left leaning,
Mhm.
and then you have some right wing astrologers or conservative astrologers, wherever the appropriate tag might be, and they do feel like, oh yeah, there is that community, and I'm not really wanted in there because my politics are different.
Well, I mean,
I
are
know those
you?
people exist. I don't know what the actual numbers are.
Well, of course,
Um,
but do you have clients? Like I have clients that are MAGA diehards.
yeah, I've had two clients since November who admitted to me they voted for Trump, and this was fairly soon after the election. And I do think they chose me to read their charts because I had predicted Trump. Um, they were, not the most. Yeah, they were people who I think in other circumstances wouldn't necessarily have been so rigorously right wing as they happen to find themselves in 2024. But most of my client base, I would say, seems to be left leaning, insofar as it comes up.
Mhm.
But also I have my client base is international. So certainly my American clients are more likely to have voted Biden over Trump. But then, I've got clients in Asia and Europe and yeah, all over the place. Um, Even if they are conservative or liberal, they might very well have very different values from, how we associate those labels as well. So yeah,
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 I would agree. I would say also it's important to, I mean, something that I'll stop what I was going to say there because it just gave me another idea. Something that irritates me in the astrology community, especially people that have a big social media presence or whatever, is the politics coming into the astrology. I mean,
right.
I'm thinking of certain people specifically. I won't name them, but to me, when I listen to what they are saying or espousing or publishing, it loses its gravitas for me because they've got all these political um, angles that they work in
Yeah.
to their cause. And I mean, that's fine because generally, politically, I can get on board with that. But I just don't think it has a place in astrology and the objectivity that would
Yeah.
hopefully be there and then communicated through whatever they're seeing in the charts or the transits or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'd say, I have spent a large part of the last 20, 30 years studying history with astrology. And when I first got started, I was mostly studying the lives of people that I admired, musicians, looking at the charts of John Coltrane or Thelonious Monk and getting really into the weeds of their biographies. But then eventually, I realized I didn't just want to know the charts of people I admired. I wanted to look at charts of people who, I didn't like, who I thought were monsters. What are their lives like? How can I look at their charts and sort of look at life from their perspective? I'm talking about people like, your Stalins and your Hitlers and what have you. So they're not people who I'm likely to go soft on, you know what I mean? Like to suddenly, oh, there's a whole human side to them. But to study their lives at the same level of detail and yeah, objectivity that I was using with the charts of people I did admire. And so that is an exercise that I've been using in my
Mhm.
study. for most of the time that I've been an astrologer. I was acutely aware, like, okay, so you don't like Richard Nixon, or you don't like Kaiser Wilhelm, or so go ahead and learn everything you can about them, and learn their charts and how their astrology functioned, and what they wanted out of life, and where they would have felt they succeeded or failed, et cetera, et cetera. And to really just sort of look at things in those terms, as opposed to like, okay, this guy's a monster and this guy's really great, and that kind of baggage that you bring along to it.
Yeah.
I do think Hitler's evil, but it's sort of irrelevant when I'm looking at his chart, because when I'm looking at his chart, you're trying to see life, as he went through it. It's not unlike, say, detectives when they're looking for a serial killer and they're doing a psychological profile. They're
Mhm.
not worried that they're suddenly going to turn into uh, um, you know, serial killers themselves if they go through the exercise of trying to think, like, how is this guy thinking? What's he going through? What's likely most important to him, et cetera, et cetera. So I see it sort of like that, sort of like detective work, where you have to be empathic, which is not this. I think this is another sort of slip up. No, it's not unrelated to what you're mentioning here. I think there is a tendency with some people in the community, maybe the same ones you're talking about, to confuse the words sympathy and empathy. You can be empathic and sympathetic at the same time, but it's
Mhm.
not automatic. Empathy just means you understand the other person's perspective. You don't have to like it or agree with it or what have you. You just want to you want to know it. In these situations, in politics and crime fighting, or any of these situations.
But how do
Um,
you feel like somebody, I mean, what sort of advice would you give a novice astrologer that would help them keep their personal bias or whatever out of looking at a chart? Because to me, that's one of the biggest puzzles whenever, and I still, like 45 years later, after working, professionally, I still, struggle with that, like how to keep my particular stance or bias or preferences even out of. I mean, my question is there a purely objective way, do you think, of like looking at a chart, unpacking it, etc.?
Well, I mean, purely is the word that makes that question a little harder to answer.
Okay, well, you get the gist
But
of.
no, but I mean, my answer would be largely yes, but purely implies like
Okay,
you
let
and
go of the your
sure.
Virgo stellium, let go of that.
Yeah, I know.
But
I'm I'm
yeah,
I'm maybe I'm maybe being a bit pedantic on that, but that really is the point. It is the key to it. Like it's a pretense, you can't entirely curb your moral compass, but you can sort of table it when you're doing this kind of work. You
mhm.
can just sort of, yeah, sort of, you have the way you feel, you have your values. And unless they're on unless your values are founded on something that's not going to hold up, and you're likely to cave and change and go dark or something like that, um, then what do you have to fear from yeah, looking into the lives, getting out of your comfort zone. I guess to answer your question, what would I say to novice astrologers? Try to leave your comfort zone. Try to look at study a lot of charts, which is something I recommend anyway. Learn history. Try to get an idea of the people who populate history, and those we have really good,
Mhm.
well-timed charts and well-documented lives. And even if it's someone that you really loathe, take the time to learn that person's chart and that person's life.
I think, yeah, that's I can from experience related to Jeffrey Dahmer talk
Sure.
in line of what you're saying, because I put up his chart as kind of a passing curiosity. And of course, it was intermixed with my own bias of being horrified by this person. And
Yeah.
then that took its own trajectory studying that, and then actually prompted me as a writer to do this like nonfiction or this fiction book on him. But I did use the chart as the basis in
Mhm.
writing that book.
Thing it too.
Well, let's shift gears here because there's so much I wanted to go over with you
Yeah,
today. We kind of jumped over the elephant in the room, which was, of course, is there any other topic other than Donald Trump in
right.
life at this moment? And so, okay, so you predicted Trump. I think you and I, last time we got together, we had different takes on looking at the inauguration chart. You, again, were very astute with what you tuned in there as far as the Sun Pluto conjunction in that chart, and then the implementation of Project 2025, which I thought that was pretty skillful on your part to see that coming to life as indicated by that chart, even though Trump said he never read it, didn't know what it was. Um,
Right.
so Trump's in office now, uh, and uh, it would seem that there's just this unleashing of one kind of horror after another. And I think
Yeah.
even for MAGAites, they're starting to have perhaps second thoughts about everything. You know,
Some must. Yeah, if you've if you're suddenly, like, for instance, if you live in Missouri and you voted for Trump and a hurricane has just destroyed your home and you've just found out, FEMA is no longer really a thing.
exactly.
Yeah,
Or
you might have some
Target.
thoughts.
I've read Target and Walmart are already showing because they're basically 80% filled with Chinese shit in there. They're
Right.
starting, the tariffs prices are showing. But what I'm curious about, and this is going to be a broad question because it'll probably involve the US chart in some sense, and as far as predictions go, or getting some kind of overview about where we're heading. I don't know if you followed the news, but the country itself is like buried in debt.
Yeah.
Student loans, people are delinquent on their mortgage, they're delinquent on car payments. I mean, it's through the roof, these numbers right now.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so then we've got the tariffs, what that's doing to the economy. What do you have any kind of sense of like where we're heading as a country?
Yeah. So I'm following things closely. In terms of where things are going. Well, back in 2013, I self-published this book called Uranus USA, which was a book about 2025 and the fact that Uranus would be going into Gemini in 2025, which it will be in a few weeks from now.
Right.
And in this book was broken into three chapters. The first chapter was about the American Revolutionary War when Uranus was in Gemini from 1774 to 1781. And then chapter two was about the Civil War, which was Uranus and Gemini from 1858 and the Lincoln Douglas debates to 1865. And then chapter three was about American involvement in World War II and becoming the process of becoming the global superpower. Uranus was in Gemini again from 1941 to 49. So from Pearl Harbor to just before the time when the Soviet Union got the bomb and there was now an arms race. So
Hmm.
the period where the United States was the only superpower, that sort of 4-year window between Hiroshima and the Soviet Union getting the bomb. So these three periods, which I mean, I wasn't the first astrologer to ever talk about this. I mean, Luke
Yeah.
Broughton and Evangeline Adams discussed this thing before, back at the turn of the century, before the Second World War happened. It's kind of old knowledge with astrologers, but I wrote this book just to sort of, at this point, 2025 was 12 years away, and I thought it was a nifty little thing to do a recap on. And I did, and I did this, when I put the book out in limited edition and did a speaking tour of 20 cities in the States and Canada, and then, sort of sat around and waited for what was going to happen. So with all that in mind, it's largely the Uranus transit in Gemini that was the instigator for me to think that Trump would win. There were other
Right.
factors as well, but that was the main thing. I was like, okay, this really. I think I said before in one of my other appearances with you, that even in 2016. I didn't think Trump would win, and I was sort of confused because I'm like, well, Trump is a 2024 guy. Why would he be
Hmm.
running now? And it was only like at 2020 when he lost the election to Biden, and everything that followed January 6th and what have you. Then I was like, oh, okay, now I see how this plays out. And that was really it from 2020, from him losing. Then I understand, okay, he's going to come back in 2024 and be this other, be a very different sort of creature than the one we had. 45 would not be what 47 would turn into. So with all this in mind, to answer your question, like I think that, Trump himself is not really the story anymore. He's done what he needed to do, which was to win that election, which keeps him out of jail, et cetera. And of course, he's doing all the plundering and what have you of the country's resources. But I do think this is going to be largely a Vance presidency and sort of beyond. There might even be other people who we don't even have eyes on yet who are also sort of part of the story.
Okay, stop
Um,
there. Sorry to interrupt, but when you say Vance presidency, you're seeing him expiring in office.
Well, I mean that's that would be the Occam's razor, right? I guess the only other thing would be, some kind of like resignation or something like that. Um,
Hmm.
I'm less firm on how it comes about. I mean, obviously, expiring is the fastest and most likely and most common way for a vice president to ascend to the presidency. So, but let's just say more than anything, I think it's Vance ultimately being in charge. And yeah, I have a few reasons for thinking this. One
Okay,
of
I'm
them
looking
is
at Trump's chart right now. I just brought it up.
yeah.
Are you gonna? I'll put that below the in the com or the text of this post for folks. Are you coming to this understanding of yours through studying his natal chart or the U.S. chart? Don't say both.
I'm coming through this understanding Trump's chart, U.S. transits. I don't really think about the U.S. chart in the same way.
Okay,
I don't,
let's stay on Trump for now. So
yeah,
what's okay, Uranus goes into Gemini this month,
yeah.
and then we've got this what going to like a Uranus return for Trump? Is that what key
Yeah, well, I mean,
points
the
are
first
you
thing that,
focusing
okay,
on?
well, the first thing that happens, I mean, this is really interesting.
Hmm.
He's turning 79 about 3 weeks from now, June
Hmm.
14th.
Hmm.
79, going back to the Babylonians,
Oh,
was
wow.
always a really notable age because it's a perfect cyclical return of Mars and Mercury. And if you look at Donald Trump's natal chart and you look at the solar return that he's going to have in a few weeks when he turns 79, you will see Mars and Mercury very, very close to the natal position.
Okay.
And of course, he's got Mars rising. He's got this Regulus Mars rising. Um, and his Mercury is quite an active thing as well. Um, if you consider the way he expresses himself, an active Mercury. So this is like that Mars rising of his is very curious. The fact that he's having that synodic return. Um, the past instances where he's had birthdays with a Mars return have been sort of interesting as well. I won't get too much into
Yeah,
that.
don't.
His past, but it's just like that is a pretty big indicator for me. One of that there's a sort of to have a chart like that. is a sort of completion of a major cycle. Like he's really like 79 is as far as he can go, if you will.
Is that true
And
for all of us? Excuse me for cutting you off. Is
yes,
it
every
true at
single person when we
79
yeah.
that there?
There are certain ages that you can associate with certain planetary returns, and and it's a hell of a shorthand when you know these cycles because, yeah, if you see someone with, say, Mars retrograde in the fourth house, you know that they had that first Mars return when they were 15. The age of 15 is also an age where the fourth house comes alive in the solar return. And it's a sort of shorthand. Anyone with Mars in the fourth house, let alone, if it's a Mars retrograde or if it's in its own domicile, that's something very Martian happened to that person at the age of 15.
Okay, so
There is a shorthand you can do with that. So yeah, what I'm saying about Trump is like cyclically speaking, he's coming, and his actual birthday, he's got this big parade. I mean, talk about having the Mars and Mercury return. He's got this big military parade planned for his birthday, and I
mhm.
think that's going to be the sort of the big Schadenfreude moment. Um,
How
you know,
so?
Well, the thing about Regulus, I mean, this is something everyone's wanted to see for a long time. Regulus, the fixed star, which is very close to the ecliptic, it's the heart of the lion, it's one of the royal stars,
Hmm.
and it's notorious for being like there is the sort of the Leo ego to it. But it is one that brings a sort of a humbling fall from grace.
Yeah, here
Um,
Rob Hand brought this up. I think he was
yeah.
talking to Deborah Holding on this and
Okay.
mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're at the
yeah,
heights and then suddenly a
right.
drop. So you're
And it
making
is,
that correlation with the
yeah, I've seen it. I mean, I didn't hear Rob say that to Deborah, although
Mhm.
it's not a piece of astrology I've just invented. Bernadette
No, I know.
Brady
I'm
write
just
about, yeah,
saying I
yeah,
caught that
yeah.
between the two of them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Bernadette Brady, writes about Regulus having that quality to it, and I've studied other sort of Regulus centric charts. I myself have Mercury conjunct Regulus, but yeah, people like Joe Strummer from The Clash or Robert Plant or people like that, and yeah, you can see it now. The thing about Trump, of course, is. A lot of us have been waiting for years for him because he's had all kinds of like what would be humbling moments that he just sort of breezed through, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, people have been, I think for the last 10 years, people have been predicting
yeah,
aneurysms and
right.
strokes and heart blowups. And so he's the
Okay.
gift that keeps giving and is truly Teflon light, right?
Yeah,
So you're
very
saying though there's something coming.
that that birthday brings that Regulus full return in that solar return 79 for a guy like him. It is the closest Mars return, cyclical return that you get in a lifetime.
So
You
you're
have
when you
Mars
say the
returns at
Regulus, sorry to cut you off, when you say the
yeah,
Regulus return, you mean Mars and Mercury
Mars on the
in
Regulus,
that
yeah,
cycle
yeah,
returning.
which is
So that's
rising. He's got the Mars Regulus
I see.
rising.
Okay, right. I was okay, good.
Yeah.
So that you're
That
that
eclipse he stared into in 2017 was an eclipse. That was an eclipse that was on the degree of Regulus as well, which was
and of course he'd
incredible.
be
And of
looking
course,
at
he
that.
did. Yeah, he did. He looked at it and he didn't go blind, much to our amazement. Um, and yeah, I mean, this is the thing about Trump is he has been so Teflon-like, and I think I think everyone's sort of exhausted on expecting him to fall. I mean, this is kind of what helped me in predicting his win was, I predicted he would win in 2022 when he was up for all these trials, right? He was up for like four different trials at once. People were like, "What are you talking about? There's no way he can run. He's gonna wind up in jail. He's got all these trials coming up." Um, so he's there have been many other instances where people were expecting him to fall and it didn't happen.
So you
Um,
see, I'm sorry, you see Vance then pers-
yeah,
what is it that brings Vance into the mix for you? Because Trump
there
is
are a few. Yeah, there.
inspired, or Vance is running things behind the scenes, or
Well, I
Trump's
mean,
still there.
Vance is running things for someone else behind the scenes. Let's put it
Oh,
that way.
right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
But
think, yeah, look, it would be great if Vance turns out to have like, some kind of backbone and Trump's taken out and he suddenly says, "Okay, I'm gonna do a bunch of, same things now and leave the past behind us." That would be, an optimum scenario. But no, I think, he answers to people. The reason I think Vance, um, it comes back to that Sun Pluto conjunction that we had at inauguration
mhm,
because Trump's natal Pluto in Leo is conjunct Vance's Sun in Leo. So they have a synastry. When they were inaugurated under that Sun Pluto conjunction, their synastry is what was being sort of, officiated,
right.
like that is the thing that connects them is that Sun Pluto,
Hmm.
astrologically and by virtue of the inauguration. And as I said before, that Sun Pluto conjunction that they were inaugurated under, that was the first Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius since the days of the French Revolution.
Right.
So it really is like, like very literally, like this is the new day, astrologically and clearly with regard to what the Trump administration was going to mean, what the 47 presidency was going to mean. We're only a few months in, and we can see that the world is changing faster this year than it's changed in our lifetimes. So with that in mind, the conjunction of Sun Pluto at inauguration, to my mind, what Pluto does under those instances, Pluto is very transformative and transportative. It's the planet that will take someone who's at the bottom and raise them up to the top, or it'll take someone who's at the top and send them falling to the bottom. It
Hmm.
really is that. So it can be the houseless person who finds a winning lottery ticket and, suddenly shakes off all their problems, or it can be the, billionaire CEO who throws himself off his penthouse because of his gambling debts. It's very, you either rags to riches or riches to rags. Those types of, it's not always financial or so linear as I've just outlined it, but that is the experience of Pluto, that you're going from one station to another, either
Right.
way up or way down or way sideways or what have you.
Hmm.
And I mean, Trump is already just, I mean, on top of everything, literally. He's got everything to lose. Whereas Vance, literally a nobody until, he was tapped on the shoulder to for this position. Apart from being the VP candidate during the election, the only other thing we knew about him was he published this book about him being a, fake hillbilly. And that's a real Pluto kind of deal. If someone was like, quote unquote, a hillbilly, although, he's not really, and he's anonymous and powerless and over a short period of time ascends to the most powerful office in the world. That's really consistent with the symbolism to me.
Well,
And
yes.
I,
But I
I,
mean, I think to your point about Vance, I mean, really the money power there is the big tech bros,
yeah,
Peter Thiel and his ilk.
yeah,
So that again leans into like, I don't know, shadow type government where these people behind the scenes, which is very Pluto too, are the real like power magnets and whatnot. But I just want to bring this back on track. So
yeah,
this perfection of this 79-year synodic cycle, we've talked about that, his Mars, Mercury coming back, reigniting the Mars Regulus ascendant conjunction. Now, do you go like start going into more specifics on this theme of Trump's kind of s- fading out or demise or whatever, as
yeah. Well,
James
I mean,
Comey put it, 86-47. Um,
right.
but are you looking at what Saturn now into Aries opposing as Jupiter? I mean, are you going into the weeds like that, or this is, like more of a general thing just related to that synodic cycle that
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any, I think he, put it this way. Um, I don't think he's gonna be there any later than spring of 26. So
Mhm.
like 9 months from now. But whether he falls from grace tomorrow or on March 31st, 2026, or what have you, I have less a sense of that. What I do think that the flashpoint that comes in the spring of 2026 that'll be when Mars joins Saturn in Aries. I forget which month it is. It might be March or April, something like that.
Okay.
But when it does, the reason this is important, excuse me, the reason this is important, when Mars and Saturn are co-present in Aries, when they're in the same sign, during that period, it's going to bring up a power struggle between two parties who are in the administration now and are pretty high up, both of whom have Mars Saturn co-presences in the same sign, in Scorpio, even though they're 30 years apart. And these would be RFK Jr. and JD Vance.
Mm.
RFK Jr., born in January of 54, has Mars and Saturn in Scorpio. JD Vance, born in August of 1984, has Mars and Saturn in Scorpio. If you put their charts together in a bi-wheel, you really see like how they're, um, it's going to be, right now, obviously, Trump is the sheriff and Vance is, largely an envoy sent off kill popes with his psychic energy or whatever it is he's doing. Um,
Right.
but once we get to next spring, what I can imagine is some kind of standoff between Vance and RFK. And I imagine that's being done in the vacuum, of a Trump absence.
Hmm.
So that seems the most likely thing to me for now. But to answer your broader question, because you were asking me about the larger picture, I do think this is it was the Uranus transit through Gemini that had me thinking that Trump would be elected in the first place,
Yeah.
and that has served me well. And the way this pattern shakes out is basically, we're in this Uranus and Gemini period for the next 7 years, and during that time, it's likely to be a very volatile and I'm sad to say probably violent period in the country's history. I hope I'm wrong about that, but it just that's been consistent the last three times.
But
It's usually
yes,
involved.
I'm sorry. Go
But
ahead.
what happens is when we get to 2032,
Oh my
the year
God.
2032, towards the end, when Uranus is getting ready to leave Gemini, Saturn will come and conjoin Uranus in Gemini in 2032. And that does tend to be, the two things happen during Saturn Uranus conjunctions. Either like the warring parties put aside their differences and work things out, or one sort of culture is completely subsumed by the other, in some kind of total victory. But one way or the other, it's sort of it brings parties together. It brings forces that are usually incongruent or incompatible and forces them to merge.
Okay.
So, the last time Saturn and Uranus were conjunct was in 88, a year, ironically, before the Saturn Neptune conjunction. Saturn Neptune conjunctions happen a little more frequently than Saturn Uranus because Uranus is faster than Neptune, so Saturn has that much further to catch up. The last Saturn Uranus conjunction was in 1988. That was a year when Ronald Reagan went to Moscow to sign an anti nuclear deal, something that would have seemed utterly unlikely just a couple of years earlier.
Hmm.
The war, the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan. The Iran-Iraq war ended. The Angolan war ended just north of me in South Africa. That was a sort of a proxy Cold War being fought between Cuba and South Africa in Angola. So all these wars ended. Everyone was trying to get along and make peace and wrap up all the things that had been dogging them. And the Saturn-Uranus conjunction before that was in 1942 at the beginning of World War II, but that was the instance where the United States and the Soviet Union suddenly became allies against Nazi Germany. So it, like one way or the other, like I'm saying, it really sort of brings together unlikely allies and sort of generally forces people either to cooperate, or the defeat has been so all-encompassing that, like I'm thinking of like in the 1520s when you know the Spanish conquistadors took over the Mayan civilization. That was a Saturn Uranus conjunction. That wasn't so much a cooperation as one just sort of totally overcoming another, and effectively creating a new culture, the Latin American culture.
Okay,
Um,
I don't want to
so
go
yeah,
further
yeah.
back in time because I feel like I'm returning to the womb.
Well, sure, but it is
Kidding.
important to understand this stuff. I mean,
No, no,
fair
I'm
enough.
not denigrating that. There's things that came up in the earlier topics we
Sure.
were on that I wanted to comment on.
Okay.
One
Yeah.
of them is not really related to astrology, but I guess to semiotics, you could call it. But it pulls in the theme of this absence of Trump with, I don't know, dementia or mortality or whatever. But when Biden was diagnosed with this aggressive prostate cancer, so
Right.
he's real. I lost a dear friend to this like several months ago. Same
Oh,
thing that Biden's got, where it went into the bones. It's not. I don't care how good your medical care is. That is pretty much DOA on arrival
yeah.
thing.
Right.
Um, so Trump, of course, tweets out or whatever the fuck he does, truths out condone, we're sorry this has happened. I was like, well, somebody else had to have written that towards Biden. But then he just can't sit still. And then today is now stirring shit up about that Biden's prostate cancer was a conspiracy, that
Yeah.
as well as the, Sleepy Joe dementia that Biden had, according to Trump years back, that nobody announced, which is true, that he also probably had this cancer and that it was being withheld from the public.
Mm.
And when Trump did that, I thought, oh wow, now you're like entering into like another facet of fate or having to do with your own mortality. Because you know how Trump is, where people are locked in his imagination, that he gets into these. And of course, Biden's been a big one, Obama's been a big one, thorn in his side. Of course, now it's Bruce Springsteen, Taylor Swift. There's always somebody occupying that. But this jab at Biden about somebody on their very close to their demise, I thought that is going to come back and bite you in the ass. So I bring all that up to your point about it looks like he could be off the stage by, I don't know, spring of next year or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
I have
so
to, yeah. I mean, I guess the one thing, I mean, this is just sort of since the whole thing revolves around a Mars return on his ascendant, I have to think it's something Martian, which, I mean, can be an illness, but I'm thinking more likely, uh, um, violence of some
uh,
kind.
well, you remember the Butler attempt was very Martian. It was conjunctus midheaven squaring natal
Yeah.
Mars, right?
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
think Uranus was conjunct
Yeah.
Mars, I think,
Yeah.
for the Butler attempt. So this is the thing about Trump, is that the astrology just plays out so literally with him. And that
Yeah.
fascinates me as a continual student of astrology, is like, well, if somebody is so overtaken by expressing all these qualities of their fate that the chart would indicate, then you should have all this accuracy with the various transits and permutations that
Yeah.
come up. Um, and so to your point again, this Mars return there that, yeah, it seems to echo something violent, something disruptive, something
Yeah.
final, I
Yeah.
guess. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, what I do know about his life, the last time there was a Mars retrograde going from early Virgo into late Leo and going over his natal Mars. This was in the early months of 1995, just before he had to file what was the casino he had there, his big I mean, he's gone
Push,
bankrupt a
yeah,
few times. But his big bankruptcy happened in those early months of 95 after that retrograde. And that retrograde hasn't happened since, but it's coming up in early 2027. There's going to be a Mars retrograde that starts at 10 Virgo and goes back into late Leo. And for the first time since 95, that Mars transit is going to, that Mars retrograde will go over his natal Mars. That's a whole year after the thing I'm talking about with Vance and RFK. That seems like awfully long for him to stay. Maybe the power struggle between Vance and RFK happens while Trump is nominally still in charge and then falls from grace the following year. But one way or the other, I just I don't see him finishing out the year. The
what
the the,
year?
vi- sorry, filling out the term. I misspoke. And yeah, whether it's like another sort of Butler the sequel, or something more in keeping with the kind of regime that he's shaped around himself, which is the sort of the Latin American slash African model, where you get this like Superman who takes charge and is really popular until he runs the country into the ground because of how corrupt he is, and then the military goes in and takes over, and you get some other kind of regime. And that also could happen. That's unprecedented in the United States. But when you think about it, the CIA has overturned has used that playbook, in a lot of other countries. And that's the
Totally.
thing is. That was the other thing I sort of looked towards. I don't know if it was something I said on your show, but something I've said to a number of people, just after the election and what have you. The fact that people are disappearing. I mean, right now it's still somewhat visible, but yeah, to get to the point that what we had in Indonesia or Argentina or Brazil or Chile, where, yeah, young people just, they go out to see a movie and no one ever sees them again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and right now it's just happening to people who are visibly foreign, or visibly aggressively vocal on pro-Palestine views or what have you. But eventually that that filter goes further and further down. And that is that the CIA playbook. That is the way things have gone down under these circumstances before. So yeah, it's sort of a race against time. I think um, it's more perilous perhaps for at least some people, for really certainly for very vocal, politically vocal people. They could be
So
more in trouble than they imagine.
yeah, I think one interesting thing about you not living in the US is that you miss the quotidian
Yeah,
expression of this, what I connected up to your comment about Uranus going into Gemini, and what often erupts into like a war or like some kind of a meltdown, related to polarity, because I think of Gemini as a kind of the
yeah,
key sign of polarity. Um, there's such a palpable sense when you're just out and about here of people simmering hatred and rage,
right.
and it's left and right. It goes to my thing, which is that the Civil War never was resolved in the United
Oh no,
States.
yeah,
So
absolutely,
we're still living through permutations of that particular disagreement.
sure.
Um, and the same
I
things that drove it are there, related, to
sure.
racism, xenophobia, all of that. I don't know. This might be the fate of all countries where there's tribes and this kind of shit happens. But I would think that there would be some kind of an eruption prior to Saturn and Uranus coming into a,
Oh, yeah.
conjunction at the late part of that. Though
Yeah.
certainly the buildup would be happening once Uranus gets in to Gemini,
Yeah.
because I think then the stops are kind of the Taurus stops are pulled off, and then you're into that wild mercurial realm of Gemini where things are flicking and flacking and erupting much quicker. Um, so there's that. I wanted to add that to the mix.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
make of is there any of this stuff more you want to add on that topic?
Yeah.
Or,
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's true. I'm not there, and I am missing that sort of that daily on the street life. I have a astrology consultation practice, and most of my clients are American. It is an international practice, but I'm speaking to Americans every single day,
Mhm.
and have been. So I do have some, sort of contact, even if it is through the Zoom camera and not my feet on the ground. Um, and yeah, the rage. I know it's there. I'm watching. I'm in touch enough that I know it's there, even from across the planet. What I'll say about the Civil War and it never ending, the truth, Frederick, is wars don't end. I mean, it's not
Right.
just the Civil War. I mean, if you know the Civil War, I mean, the Civil War. If again, here's a practice in empathy. If you're Jefferson Davis, as far as you're concerned, the Civil War is just the American Revolutionary War Part Two. If you're talking to Jefferson Davis and how he sees the world, he's fighting the North the same way the founding fathers had fought the British for the same reasons, and like that's his worldview, and you and I could take it apart, but it is how he sees things,
Mhm.
and there is an element to that permeates a lot of certainly the Confederate rhetoric. And I can tell you, I'm from Montreal. That's my hometown, and it's a place where the what you call the French Indian War, what we call the 7 Years' War, the war that had happened 20 years before the Revolutionary War. That war is always on on display in Montreal, and really in many ways the whole deal with Montreal and the whole deal with any kind of schism between English and French speaking peoples goes all the way back to the Hundred Years' War, back in the 1400s, 13 and 1400s. And, Frederick, it's a fun fact. Do you know why they called it the Hundred Years' War?
No, I don't. Why?
It's because it was only supposed to last 100 years. But it's actually like if you live in Montreal, you see, oh, actually, it can be a 700-year war. People still carry it in their hearts. It's still something that is fought over in other ways.
Mm.
A lot of wars don't end. Go down to Mexico and see how they feel about the U.S.-Mexican war. Is it really permanent in their view, or is it just sort of a temporary few hundred-year setback?
Yeah.
Um, it's the reality of these wars. All the more so when you're in places that have fought a revolution to overthrow some tyranny before. Once you have revolutionaries or soldiers, they're always fighting the revolution and the war even after it's over,
Okay,
which
let's
winds up
shift.
being the undoing.
But
Yeah,
that's a
go
great
ahead.
point, and it shows to the stupidity of human beings and the length of time it takes for things, the generations that have to pass to get any kind of diminishment of the ire. It's bizarre, though. It seems like England and Ireland kind of like calmed down in some ways, right? The whole Protestant Catholic mania that
I mean,
you
look,
don't
I
hear
mean,
about that.
what? Yeah, one of the things that helps that, I suppose, is that, people aren't nearly as tied to their churches as they once were.
That's a good
Um,
point, right?
You know,
Yeah.
what's his name? Christopher Hitchens had this great story about, someone he knew who was driving across a checkpoint between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. This was a journalist friend of his, and the masked gunman who stopped his car said, "Are you a Protestant or Catholic?" And he said, "I'm Jewish." Okay, are you a Protestant Jew or a Catholic Jew? Like there's you had to be on one of these sides, whereas of course there were plenty of Irish people who didn't necessarily identify
Right.
with them.
That's a great,
I
very
went,
Christopher Hitchens too, of story.
yeah, no, yeah, it's one of his great little
Oh,
raconteur moments.
so,
Um, Yeah.
okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think the thing that helped Ireland was Brexit, because suddenly Northern Ireland was like, oh, maybe we do want to unite with the Republic. I mean, if we had known it was that simple, we could have ended the Troubles decades ago and just, had
Yeah,
a Brexit.
Brexit was a good example of why stuff shifted the way it did there. I think it sort of
Yeah.
blew everybody's mind that it actually happened. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like Trump winning blew everybody's mind. So maybe these shocks have to get administered by the universe or something. I want to switch over to um, the ongoing Jupiter Saturn square, which
Yeah.
I think if you're like me, you probably subscribe to, Rudgyer's notion of the formation of the conjunction sets the tenor for what is going to play out through the square opposition trine of that uh, theme that gets released, or seed
Right.
theme that gets released during that conjunction. So the square that we're in now is the finalizing square of, I think it is, isn't it, of the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
some years back.
Yeah, the COVID time. I mean, right when January 6th was happening, was within a week or two of the conjunction, right? It was like at the very end of 2020, as I recall.
Yes. And then that was
So
the big shift into the air element for the
yeah,
Jupiter. Well, there'd been
yeah.
one in Libra, one off, one
When Reagan was elected, yeah,
right.
yeah,
But now
yeah,
we're into, like, I think it's a 200-year cycle of
yes,
them uniting in air.
yeah.
So what,
So yeah, here's the interesting thing about this Jupiter Saturn square. I mean, it really started to come into formation in July of 24. And since July of 2024, Jupiter and Saturn have not been more than about 7 degrees apart. It's basically been a perpetual square, as far as I'm concerned, since about July of 2024. Well, let me tell you the names of two people who have natal Saturn square Jupiter in their birth charts. One of them is Donald Trump, and the other is Kamala Harris.
right, right.
Both of them have natal Saturn square, natal Jupiter. And as soon as she came into the picture was as the square, came into place. And yeah, it's we've been living under that square. It's been a sort of a dominant feature, I think, in the astrology of everything going on, along with your various Venus and Mercury retrogrades and Mars retrogrades and so on and so forth, and outer planet ingresses. Yeah, the Saturn Jupiter square has been sort of this mainstay, and yeah, they're both going to move into new signs while they're square, essentially.
So in old, school mundane astrology, I believe it was like the uh, Democrats were associated with Jupiter, and then the
Mm.
GOP with Saturn. In
Okay.
mundane astrology, as far as US politics were concerned. I may
Okay.
have that correlate wrong, but I mean, it's hard to say because stuff shifted so much over the years, and then the
Yeah.
differences between the parties seem to kind of start to wear away, even though the Democrats hold on to some erstwhile old things. They seem like they're sold out to me, as far
Mhm.
as, representing the little person. Um, but do you see, or well, I see this ongoing, this square that keeps going on and on, seemingly is this tension, that's there between right,
Yeah,
left, conservative,
yeah,
liberal,
yeah.
just grinding away. How do you, like, when you're working with clients and they're dealing with the Jupiter Saturn square in their life? So I'm thinking of my listeners because of how they're dealing with it. What sort of topics do you go into with them about ways to work, now, because it's a transit that's hitting everyone? But what do you suggest for them in ways to
Oh,
work with that square?
yeah. I mean, the way that square seems to be manifesting these days, I mean, this is my sense of it, is everyone knows that they should be like doing something to move into their next, chapter of their lives, be it a big or small chapter, be they older or younger people. Like everyone has a sense like I'm supposed to be going in a new direction now, but I don't know what it is. And this is, I mean, the thing that's happening now as Saturn is moving into Aries is it's joining Neptune. And so Saturn Neptune square Jupiter is a different feature than merely Saturn squaring Jupiter.
Sure.
The Saturn Neptune coming together is this sort of ultra reality. It's very clarifying. It's sort of it suddenly you can see the truth. Everyone can sort of get a sense of what is true and what is
A
not. I
reality
do, I
check. Yeah.
yeah, I do think we're going to return in some fashion to a reality where, I mean, it's not like we're all going to suddenly agree with each other, but we're at least going to be largely closer to the same shared vision of shared reality, that we might have had, say, 10 years ago, that we clearly have lost in the last few years. This can be through, the realities of climate change, the realities of the fact that, Trump is in fact not making America great again, or, arguably worse off than it's ever been, et cetera, et cetera. But there is this sort of insight. I do think everyone goes in their own way from being to carrying a certain amount of uncertainty, both about their, what they're doing in their lives and where they're supposed to be, and also sort of in terms of where the world is going and what's true. In whatever ways that we've been deceiving ourselves or deceiving each other, that just becomes harder to do when everyone really knows what the truth, is, at least more than they have. So, and when it comes to, speaking to clients, I think a lot of them, as Saturn and Neptune really coalesces over the course of the next 6, 8 months, it's a matter of you go from not knowing where to go or what to do to there only being one viable option. There's only one thing to do, and one, then it sort of coalesces into having this one defined direction that people feel compelled to follow, and coming out of a sense of ambiguity and just like knowing they should be doing things but not where or how, to a state more of very very sort of precise determination.
Okay. So, yeah, one of the things that irritates me in astrology is that and I'm not bringing this up related to what you're saying, but it triggered a thought for me, is that people, and it goes back to bringing Rudger up again, the importance of, the cycle. So the conjunction's like a seed planted.
Yeah.
It's not a full-blown revelation of something that's completed. It's like a seed, it's a notion, and then you have, to watch Jupiter move away from Saturn in this case, or rather Saturn move away from Neptune, make the square and then the trine and
Mhm.
all of that stuff. So I think what I tell my clients is, especially because Neptune's involved, is the importance of what is going on in the liminal in their life. Even though it's in a dynamic sign like Aries, this conjunction, it's the liminal, that Neptunian realm, the nocturnal dream realm, is so important to stay like take notes from it. It's almost like your transmission is coming in through that vehicle as to what this new one pointed thing is. So I just wanted to add that. It's just because the two get together, it's not like the whole thing is a full-blown revelation about what that planting of the seed is going to be between Saturn and Neptune. I do think it's like you say, a reality check, a wake-up call.
Yeah.
What worries me is the Martian element of Aries and then this precarious position we're in right now, especially in the US, but I think it's global, of authoritarianism, and then how the military maybe backs that because there's fucking riots in the street or something. I don't know.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's the one kind of downside that I
Yeah.
see if people start to get that notion of, well, we really need this kind of militaristic father figure that's gonna, pull things
Right.
together. I mean, Aries is like the original, like Old Testament type father,
Mm.
where Leo's a bit more refined of a father, and then Capricorn's like the old time father that you
Sure.
uh related to in your childhood as archetypes go. So any thoughts on this leaning into authoritarianism, which already seems to have front
Yeah.
runners going now because Saturn's like right there, like into Aries almost. It's stepping in, as we talk.
Well, this takes us right back to the last time Pluto went into Aquarius, the
Wait,
French Revolution.
Pluto into Aquarius. You jumped on
Yeah.
me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. When Pluto was in Aquarius in the 80s and 90s, we had the French Revolution, and which gave us, amongst other things, the terms left wing and right wing. That comes right out of the French Revolution. The whole concept of that divide comes out of it. But the other thing about it was a popular uprising against, the ancien regime, against an authoritarian leader. It very much is the people taking power. And if you go back to the time before that, when Pluto had been in Aquarius in the 1500s, something similar was going on in Europe at the time as well. So the thing about the authoritarian trend is, of course, it will be countered by revolution, by uprising, by popular uprising.
But
We're not
where people seem utterly like, I
right
don't know,
now. Right now they do.
they're
Right
very
now they do.
zombified is the vibe I
Right.
get. I mean,
Yeah.
friends
Right
in
now.
Europe said
Right.
to me, why aren't people out in the fucking streets in America with the
Because
shit going down?
it hasn't hit home yet. The like,
Well, I guess when
yeah,
they all get to Walmart and Target,
yeah,
will
yeah,
be the
yeah.
tipping
That's what it
point.
has. That's what the Saturn Neptune is going to be. It's either, yes, the empty shelves at the Walmart and the Target, or, amongst other things, imagine if you, spent last Christmas in your lovely home in Malibu. Right now, what it means is you own like some dust on a beach and no insurance company is going to cover you. That's going to be another thing. More houses are going to burn down or be flooded out. The climate, I think we're in for a hell of a climate change wake up call this summer. And that'll, some people will suddenly be homeless and no insurance money to save them and no
Well,
government safety net. And
I'm
so,
I'm paying for California up in Washington. My fucking
right.
home insurance literally doubled. Like when I looked at my policy a couple
And
months ago, and I called them, they're like, "Oh, well, the fires in California." I'm like, "Well, anyway." Meanwhile, they make
yeah.
like a billion
And guess what? I
something.
mean, guess what? When the time comes and the beautiful forests of the Pacific Northwest are burning down,
Bite your
a lot of people
tongue.
aren't going to get, aren't a lot of people aren't going to get their insurance money either.
Anyway,
And
so
so, so,
okay,
so what I'm saying is, like, you're saying people are zombified. Yeah, yeah, it hasn't hit home. This is what I mean by the Saturn Neptune. The point does come when people are like, oh, um, you know, um, yeah, people just, it hasn't hit yet, but it will. It
so do
will.
you
Maybe
see
it will on June 14th, on Donnie's birthday, on Donnie's 79th birthday. Maybe
Somebody
that's
had a great idea of Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift getting together and doing a concert on that day of the big parade to
right.
like suck attention away from Trump. I'm sure it won't happen, but I loved it as a notion going through the
Yeah.
astral.
Yeah, but you got to think about that twice. I mean, I've got nothing against either of those performers, but um, that's become this sort of tired go-to thing that the left does in the United States, the sort of the bolstering of the celebrities, and that's started to backfire.
Oh, it
And
backfired
I
through Harris's
yeah,
campaign.
yeah, yeah. So like that would be attractive for Springsteen and Taylor Swift fans, many of whom are probably not Trump fans, and the ones who are Trump fans, it may or may not sway a few of them. Yeah, I don't know. It's a nice idea,
So
but I think it's going to take more than celebrities. And again, Pluto and Aquarius. This is more about the sort of the masses, the faceless masses.
So another thing with Pluto and Aquarius, and I was talking with Heather Rowan Robbins the other day. She alerted me to this. I wasn't aware of it, but it's a chart she's really been studying, which is the chart for the actual creation of the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was with Neptune, or excuse me, Pluto
In
had left
Aquarius.
Capricorn, was in Aquarius, and we're now coming up to just like we had the U.S. Pluto return for the Independence
Hmm.
Declaration of
Yeah.
Independence. Now we're coming up to Pluto conjuncting the spot where the
Yes.
Constitution was
The
set,
cons
right?
the whole deal, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Supreme Court, and a lot of the states that weren't part of one of the original 13, your Vermont, your Kentucky, the states that joined in the 1790s. Yeah, these are they all have a Pluto and Aquarius relationship to their origins. So yeah, this is what I'm getting. I mean, I'm talking about the French Revolution. That was happening. The Constitutional Convention in 1787 is just before the French Revolution. And when Washington is being inaugurated president for the first time in April of 1789, Bastille Day is 3 months away.
Right.
So this is all coincidental and it is all related. But and you can even see the creation of the American nation with the Constitution, et cetera. With that all being Pluto and Aquarius, this was another form of a popular uprising. I mean, that was the idea.
But how do
Was to give
people
people
uprise
power.
nowadays, though? I mean,
Well,
because you would
they're
have
going to have
to.
to be innovative. They're going to have to. It's going to be, you know, some way that is uniquely 21st century.
Well, then
Um,
that means people are doing it online or on the internet. I mean, so much of life has shifted to this other realm where I think people are living primarily, just like you and I are right now talking to each other on Zoom. This is happening all over the place.
yeah.
And people can't seem to disconnect from what has become this extension of themselves that they walk around with and hold every day in their phone. I just wonder, like, I don't know. I wonder what form of resistance, what
Well,
form of
I look.
pushback.
I'll say one other thing. Yeah, yeah. One other consistent thing with Saturn Neptune conjunctions. In the 20th century, we had three Saturn Neptune conjunctions, and all three of them coincided with a major shift in media consumption around the world. And I'll tell you what they were. The first one was in 1917, 1918, and this is right when like radio is becoming this familiar thing, like where everyone's listening to the radio, where because of the war effort and what have you, it becomes like a mainstream thing. It existed a little before it, but it becomes this mainstream thing.
Hmm.
Then the next Saturn-Neptune conjunction was in 1952-53. Now, television had already existed. It had been invented. It existed before the war. But what happens in 1952-53, in England, the king dies, and the young Queen Elizabeth is going to have her coronation. So everyone in England goes out and buys a TV set. And in the United States, the first presidential election to be televised, Eisenhower's elected. Eisenhower, who has the sun in Libra, and Saturn and Neptune are conjunct his sun as he's elected president in 1952. And again, that's going to be televised. And so everyone in America goes out and buys a TV set. And what was this sort of luxury, item that a few households had in 1951 suddenly becomes this thing that by the end of the decade, 90% or whatever, some huge percentage of families have them in their household. And then the last one was in 1989, 1990, which is exactly when even though CNN had existed for 10 years at this point, because you had the collapse of the Berlin Wall, you had Tiananmen Square, you had the release of Mandela from prison, and you had the Gulf War. And those things all sort of brought people from watching the news at 6 or 11 on network television to that 24-hour news cycle. Those events sort of got us used to the idea that we wanted to just always have the news on.
Constantly. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is in all those cases, it's not when the technology was invented, it's when it just sort of took over and became the thing.
Hmm.
And that's what I think is something else that's happening in the coming year. I don't know what exactly that would be. It's probably in front of our face and we don't really clue into it. But whatever it is, the new normal for media consumption is I think, at our doorstep. And it probably has something to do with the way people do rise up, in a popular uprising.
All I can think
Life's,
of is
yeah,
I don't know, like, cyber warfare or something, or where hackers are taking things down and disconnecting people from their hypnotic trance with their device. Um,
right.
but you see weird things like Zuckerberg's promoting these, now eyewear again, that you've got strapped to your head, that you're interacting with the world. Uh, Robot friend, AI friends. You
Right.
saw his thing where people only have three friends in life, as if he has that many. And then you really want 15 friends, but you can make those friends on social media, Meta's platforms. I just, it's so hard to get a bead on where the
Yeah.
pushback would be to actually unravel something that is so entrenched in the culture. I just, I don't know. I don't want to sound like hopeless, but
No.
it's, well, being in Aries as this conjunction occurs, it's like the whole wheelhouse of Aries is stuff that's brand new, pioneering, hasn't been seen before. So maybe we're in for some wild kind of surprise. I just hope it's
Yeah.
not turned over to, again, authoritative leaders, and then people, the ultimate surrender is just giving oneself over to that, let daddy handle it, and I'm going to go back
Right.
to World of Warcraft and keep
Right.
playing.
Well, I look, historically, Saturn in Aries is really rough on presidents. Okay. The last one was when we had Monica Lewinsky Gate. The one before that was LBJ saying he wouldn't run because of, the Tet Offensive and what have you. The one before that was FDR, fighting over the court packing thing. And the one before that was Taft, whose entire presidency was sort of a shit show, a one-termer. So historically, Saturn in Aries, even with popular presidents, is like sort of the undoing. I mean, LBJ and Clinton might have been, untouchable or considered untouchable until Saturn went into Aries during their terms. So there's also that to consider. I mean, that is the the shine is finally coming off the bloom. I'm mixing my metaphors there, but the thing that we've wanted to see Trump go through all along, I think that much is imminent. Of course, the problem is what's left, who's in charge, what kind of mess is left over, how many to what extent have people's lives been turned upside down, and just how many of their lives have been turned upside down.
Well, okay. I just got triggered, or not triggered, but I got a thought process going when you said we've all been waiting to see this thing happen with Trump. Yes, of course, I can relate to that. But I don't know. It's like maybe it's all the water in my chart or something. I don't know what quality it is astrologically, but I do have some capacity to kind of drift in and out of the different polarities that are going on. And what I'm talking about is my imagination got triggered by Bill Maher going and having dinner with Trump last month or
Right.
3 weeks ago, maybe. And of course, the liberal media went insane. They're not going to watch him anymore. He's a traitor, blah, blah. And I thought, well, okay, well, that's stupid. Why
Yeah.
not see what this, symbolizes? Again, going to semiotics about it. Forget all the stances and angles people are taking about it. What does it symbolize? These two things coming together like that with Bill Maher, who's generally considered liberal or left leaning,
Yeah.
with
Yeah. Well, he
MAGA,
was. Yeah. Yeah.
Trump. And the thing that what it did for me was what I saw as the positive outcome of that coming together of them. It got me thinking about Trump in a different light. And what I mean by that is, I'm certainly not condoning his policies and ways and means, but I think there's something within, again, the bigger picture where I don't know if Trump is some kind of comeuppance for the country or that Uranus Sun conjunction of his, where it's like a wake up call for the country to shake the shit up. But there was something in the country so entrenched in the US that you would have to have a figure like Trump come in to like blow it all up if that constitution, which really is the law of the land here, is to maintain itself through another Pluto cycle with this conjunction that's coming up to the date that the Constitution was ratified. So I could kind of see the beauty of Trump in that sense. But then when I put that up against how ignorant people are in the US, there's no training on civics anymore in school. I don't even think there's like a sixth grade reading level with people in the US now in mass.
Mm. Sure.
I just wonder, like, I'm lodged between those kind of two views. I can see the necessity of Trump, but then I'm like, well, okay, stuff is shook up, stirred up, but do people have the capacity and the understanding of history, which you're an expert at? It's like people are just have no conception of history nowadays. So they
Right.
don't understand kind of the severity of how things are situated
Yeah.
combined with my idea of the necessity. Okay, you get it all shook up, and now, we work to like, shore it up, get it put back together. I just wonder if things are too far gone, with corporatism, oligarchic
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, so that's my little spiel on that theme. I don't know, what does that bring up for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot there. I mean, the thing about the optics of Marr going for that dinner with Trump. There's this clip of him on his show, not 3, 4 years ago, I think, berating Geraldo Rivera for talking about, how Trump is his friend and he's not such a bad guy. And the things Marr says to Geraldo in that exchange are the same things that one would, say to Mars right now, like word for word. So
Right.
there's just, I mean, the visible hypocrisy, I think, is the that's always the most egregious
But people
offense for some reason,
evolve.
especially for someone who has built his whole brand on being like a sort of straight shooter, the way Mar has. And I think whether it's Mar or back in December it was Joe Scarborough and what's her name, Kaczynski. Doing the same thing, like these Trump critics going to kiss the ring. I think because they know. I mean, my feeling is they did it because they know pretty soon, the people who don't go kiss the ring are gonna, go out for a quart of milk and not turn up again.
That's freaky. That's
So
frightening.
yeah,
I
well,
don't I don't think
that's.
Mar fears that in his life, but who
Oh,
knows?
yeah, I know. I think that's a big reason why Mara went there.
Wow,
Absolutely.
that's chilling, really.
Yeah.
But that also indicates how deep we are in the shit right now, I
Yeah.
think. But I get
Look,
it. You
Frederick, I don't say any of this just, because it's what I hope will happen or what have you, but it's very consistent with the astrology, and it's consistent with history. Like I said, everything that's happening in the US now feels like the CIA, doing its thing in some third world country, except it's happening at home now. And that is part of the game plan. Everything else that's happened is consistent, with the way democracies have been taken apart in some of the countries I mentioned earlier. And so just, even apart from the astrology, this is what happens. This is how this goes down. Uh, um, Anyone who's been vocally denouncing the leader prior to the takeover suddenly has to either kiss the ring or know they got to leave the country, or they will be disappeared, and eventually, yes, people vanish.
Well, the some of the great minds scientifically, philosophically, academically are moving to your homeland,
Oh yeah. I'm
Canada,
well, I'm getting I'm
you know.
my since November, I've certainly weekly, if not daily, I'm getting American clients booking me because they want to, look at their astrocartography, where could they go, or sort of figure out a plan. There's definitely a mass exodus, or at least an attempted one, but there's all kinds of people who won't be able to, Canada's only going to let so many people in, I'm afraid to say. Um,
Right.
you
Plus,
know,
you've got to
uh,
have a pretty good bank account
yeah, yeah,
balance to get
exactly.
into a
That's
lot of countries. Like they want to see
yeah,
what are you bringing in with the cash? Well, what
yeah.
do you say? And we're going to wrap up on this point. Like, what, it sounds so dire and dour what we've been going over, but that's part of, I think, Saturn Neptune reality check.
Yeah.
What do you how do you inspire or give optimism or boost someone's creative
Yeah.
solutions that they want to try to work with, clients coming to you now, regardless of where they're living with the transits that are happening? Like what do you see as directions to consider that are haven't quite manifested yet, but we see what's upcoming with the transits and shit. So, like, how do you approach that with clients and stuff?
Well, I mean, the one thing I think that is, a sort of in the short term, in terms, without having to talk about 2032 or anything like that, in terms of like the coming year,
Sure.
for a lot of people, it's just how the Saturn Neptune, what it's going to reveal to them, what they're going to finally realize or understand. Number one, with regard to, how they want to actually, spend the rest of their time here. That is where, doing what, under what sort of pretense. But also really, I mean, you're talking about sort of the ignorance that a lot of people have about what's actually happening, or the history of things. And I think like a lot of that, the ignorance sort of goes out the window very quickly. Once you're going through a famine, you realize, oh, but if you're hungry enough, then you can find yourself doing things that you never would have imagined you would
Now
do.
you're bringing me down again, Nick.
Well, the look, I tried before. Look, I hope not. I mean, famines are terrible. Famines, famines always lead to cannibalism, and that's like not even
We're not
uh, the
going into the Donner Party's horoscopes.
no, no, we're
But
not.
okay, so you're just, what I hear you saying is hard, the encroachment of hard times can like rally people to
Yeah,
like, I don't know, get off their ass or something like that and
yeah.
get creative with,
If you were some guy living in, let's go to the Malibu beach Christmas, if you were some person who's living a cozy life in Malibu and you had everything you needed, you had a wonderful Christmas, and then your house burned down, you can't get your insurance coverage. Maybe you're sleeping on someone's couch, maybe you have a little in the bank that you're living somewhere modest, but whatever's happening, you've just realized like, you've just lost a lot. And that's just a house. I mean, there's people losing far more.
sure,
That radicalizes people, and I took your Malibuite, sort of the stereotype being someone very, coddled and comfortable and cut off from everything. Well,
elite.
yeah, elite. All you need to do is lose all that in that way, and that could change you.
So I'm going to go make a quite crazy segue here
Sure.
because I had written this down and then I lost it in the other parts of our convo. Something I'm getting a lot from people interacting with me on my newsletter is the situation with house systems. So again, this is a weird segue, but like I moved over to the whole sign system because I could not stand dealing with charts that suddenly one house was like a
Right.
100 or 90 degrees in size, or someone in Sweden or whatever that had their
Right.
chart done. Went to whole sign. And then now what I find myself doing is I'll put up the whole sign and then I'll go and, try some other house systems to
Hmm.
see like what things are doing. But what has happened to me over the long run with this is I've started to give up reading strict house placements and just focused on the angles,
Oh, yeah.
nadir, midheaven, ascendant.
Yeah.
And then I start to kind of fashion how I'm reading the chart around that. What tell me about your experience with house systems? And I take it your whole sign as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you the origin of that. So I started studying astrology in 1995, and I would sort of go between Placidus and Koch houses. I think I read somewhere that Koch houses were more accurate for more northerly latitudes, and I'm from Canada, so I kind of went on that piece of information. 1997 ran off to New York City to study astrology with the NCGR, and I'm taking classes with all these different teachers and waiting tables. And in 1998, Rob Hand gave a talk at one of these cultural centers in Manhattan, and I went to the talk, and it was all about whole sign houses. He had already left Project Hindsight. He didn't really address Hellenistic astrology as such, but he made the case for whole sign houses, and I was on board because I study transits. I mean, I got into astrology studying transits, and I always could see like when a planet changes sign, like the scenario changes. A
Right.
planet
This has
changing sign,
been, yeah.
changes the room, as it were. So it made sense on those grounds. And so when I saw Hand give the talk, I'm like, yeah, this works for me, that classic phrase. And then it was the following year in 99 that by kismet, I wound up, at Project Hindsight and meeting Schmidt and studying Hellenistic astrology. And that began then. I was already a convert to whole sign houses, and it didn't really, the two weren't connected, even though I would wind up studying both. My feeling now, I, I don't, I don't think it's something to be sort of religious over. The fact that they can be a little, amorphous, or that they bleed into each other. Um, speaks to the paradox that human beings are, and there is multivalence to these things. For my part, the whole sign system works because I follow transits and also because of the way I use solar returns, and whereby there's a different sign and house
Mhm.
that is a ruler for every year of life. And it's this really simple, elegant method of looking at a chart. That, I mean, it works beautifully. Of course, I bring in my knowledge of planetary cycles. This is what I was talking about. Like if someone has Mars in the fourth and they're at the age of 15 that Mars would be activated because there's a cyclical return, but also the fourth house at the age of 15 is the house that sort of comes alive, as it were. There's one for every year. When you're born, it's the rising sign. When you turn a year old, it's the second house, and that goes all around. And whatever planets you have in those houses, like they sort of, you can look at someone's early development by
Yeah,
looking
I'm
at what
familiar
planets they
with,
have in
you're
those houses.
talking about
Yeah.
zodiacal releasing and
No, that's not zodiacal. Zodiacal releasing is something else entirely. This is just a method of using. This is called
oh, okay.
annual perfections, a method of using solar
Oh,
returns.
okay. I don't want to go
Lots of
down that
astrologers. Yeah, yeah.
rabbit hole
But it's
though.
just, I mean, the point, well, it is house based, is my point. It is a way of like looking at solar returns relative to the signs as houses. And with that method, it works really beautifully. And along with transits, that's probably the reason why I use the whole sign house
Yeah,
system.
and I'm like you. All this planet or has to do is move into a new sign, and then it's throwing
Yeah,
itself, even if it's not literally in that house. If you're using Placidus or whatever,
yeah,
then the room's changing, the colors are changing, the
yeah.
furniture's changing. The last thing I want to bring up, and this has been an ongoing theme for me, is and it's interesting. I wonder how Hellenistic astrologers deal with this. And we might have talked about this before, where somebody born in the Southern Hemisphere, how you approach a chart there. And then what about the nodes that I believe flip when we're down in the Southern Hemisphere, right? I think
No.
they do. I think if you've got a North Node and Aries, then down Southern Hemisphere, it's South Node and Aries, right?
No. No, I mean, there is. I'll say this. I know. Obviously, I'm living in the Southern Hemisphere. I've, now encountered a number of Southern Hemisphere astrologers. There's a really good an astrologer here in South Africa named Theo Naker, who does he does Vedic and Western astrology, and he gave a workshop here. For the local Cape Town astrology group. This was a few years ago. This is maybe 5, 6 years ago. But he gave a talk. He said he hadn't been looking for it, but he had started looking at Southern Hemisphere charts with the entire zodiac flipped. So not just the nodes, but like everything. Like if you're a Cancer, you're suddenly a
Right.
Capricorn, so on and so forth. And he gave this, he said he hadn't been looking for it, but he just started looking at charts this way, and he had these really interesting observations. He brought my chart into it as well, and read my chart as though I were an Aquarius Sun, Aquarius rising, and made the case for how it reflected my life in Cape Town. And I have to say, Theo did a great job. And I'm always interested in that. Did it mean I suddenly now look at my Southern Hemisphere charts in this way? No. But I'm still intrigued by it. I like it as a concept. But I don't think there's, it doesn't really, maybe the thing for me is I'm less attached to the signs as these sort of archetypal descriptive places, and I think of them more being these domains that are ruled by a planet, or as a fall of a planet. I'm a bit more sort of yeah, I'm more involved in looking at the rulership of a sign than the sort of the symbolism. The symbolism is sort of top layer stuff. It's not like my fundamental
Hmm.
astrology.
Right.
So, maybe some of that just has to do with how I see the signs and how I use them, and it's not so relevant, or it's not as vocal. But it's not unlike studying Vedic astrology with a different zodiac. Like there's some fantastic astrology that can be done, and You
Well,
know,
this
it's
all this
interesting. It's interesting to play the intellectual exercise, and maybe, you know, maybe there's really meat on that bone.
well,
I find it interesting. I'm not a you know, a convert in practice, but
right.
I think astrologers should be you know, engaged in intellectual exercises. So it doesn't matter, like you don't necessarily have to be doing something because it's going to be, you know, what you trot out in your next, you know, reading, so you can show what you learned. But just in terms of keeping your mind engaged with astrology and thinking about it in different ways and looking at it different ways, I think
Right.
it's a very healthy exercise just to, yeah, go into these
Well, that's
thought
what
experiments.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about because I get on these private little like journeys that I start wondering about things that were firmly entrenched in my mind prior. But you know, I one of the big ones was, of course, I don't do the exact same thing like you're describing with signs being attached to rulership to get the coloration of them. But I do wonder about origin of astrology, Northern Hemisphere, the whole connection of the sign descriptions to the seasonal shifts.
Right.
And then, you know, Aries gets the cliche of everything that has to do with spring, but nothing
Right.
to do with autumn.
Right.
So I'm always checking this stuff out. And now where it's led for me is to like reevaluating the entire zodiac itself. And I'm going to start writing about that more, borrowing heavily from David Roll's work, where uh, he posits an Earth-based zodiac and been exploring his theory and argument that he started right before he died, that he and I were talking about. Anyway, Nick, it's been a pleasure connecting with you
Likewise.
again. I your wisdom is always like just this like running stream of insights, and I really
Thank you.
appreciate that whenever we get together. And thanks again for joining me
It's
today.
been my absolute pleasure. You're one of my favorite astrologers to talk to. I'm happy to come back anytime. I think we have the same Jupiters, if I remember correctly.
We
I think we
do.
don't you have Jupiter? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and your
yeah. So
Venus
I
is
think that.
there for yeah, for
Yeah,
mine.
yeah. So yeah, and you know, I've always, you know, loved reading what you write and hearing what you have to say, and it's really fun talking to you. So, you know, thank you so much for having me. Um, I wanted to mention I am available for consultations if anyone's, you know, looking for an astrologer. I'm offering a rebate right now, a 25% rebate on my consultations. So if you go to nickdaganbestastrologer.com and go to my consultation page, the promo code Uranus, all
Perfect
caps,
for you.
will get you 25% off my off a 1 hour consultation with me.
That's awesome. People take that up, folks. I mentioned that too at the start of my intro, which I kind of do before I bring people on. So now you got to get double, get the new double
The
promo.
reminder, I appreciate
So,
that. Thank you for the plug.
sure. All right, Nick, we'll
All
be in
right. Thank you
touch.
so much, Frederick.